Over the past several days, 3 females have been found dead.
Looks like someone's going after these girls.
Then they have to know to watch their backs.
Streaming March 13th.
You really want what happened to this woman? That happened to you?
Exactly why I need to keep going on this.
Starring Emmy Award winner Amanda Seyfried.
I'm worried about what you're gonna find.
So am I.
Long Bright River. A limited series. Streaming March 13th. Only on Peacock.
Hey, it's Bill Simmons from the Bill Simmons Podcast here to tell you about Michelob Ultra Courtside. It's getting fans closer to the NBA with a chance to win prizes like courtside seats, a trip to All-Star Weekend, and much more. Check it out at MichelobUltra.com/courtside. Michelob Ultra Superior Access, Courtside 24-25 sweepstakes, no purchase necessary. Open to U.S. residents 21 and up. Begins on October 1st, 2024. Ends July 1st, 2025. Multiple entry periods. Visit MichelobUltra.com/courtside for free entry deadlines, and official rules. Message and data rates may apply. Void where prohibited.
This episode is brought to you by Coffee Mate. After watching this season of the HBO's original series, The White Lotus, this is the tropical getaway I needed. One more pina colada, please.
Hey, you're not on mute.
Oh, I thought I was in paradise. Turns out it was my Coffee Mate. Coffee Mate pina colada and Thai-iced coffee-flavored creamers. Inspired by the newest season of HBO's original series, The White Lotus. For the love of coffee. Try now.
EVO. This series contains adult language and depictions of graphic violence. Listener discretion is advised. Previously on The Devil Within, Satan's Shadow. 16-year-old Whitney Bennett survived a vicious attack by Richard Ramirez, the Valley Intruder. But more than that, she caused a crisis of faith in the serial killer, for he believed that Jesus himself had intervened to save the young girl's life. Was his allegiance to Satan misplaced? Did he no longer have the devil on his side? There was only one way to find out. Every second of every day, there are millions of random occurrences that have a direct and meaningful effect on the world around us. Some of these random occurrences seem to have a hint of purpose, or maybe more than a hint. They seem to have been manufactured specifically for us. Some call them coincidences, while others may think these events are divinely inspired. We've all experienced them. Maybe you hear a song on the radio that reminds you of an old friend, and then bam, out of nowhere, they call you the next day. Stuff like that. Events that might start you thinking that maybe there's some order to the chaos of the universe. Until you remember that the pendulum of random events that seem designed to benefit you also swings the other way. Like a teenager who simply forgets to lock her window on a summer's day in California. Who would think that a random event like that could possibly lead to a brutal attack? Or a brutal attack on an innocent teenager in California would lead to, years later, that same victim finding her husband at the retirement party for the detective that put her attacker away for life. We never know what is going to lead to what. Case in point, Eagle Rock, California, July 1985. Eagle Rock is another one of those jigsaw puzzle piece cities that interlock across Southern California's San Fernando and San Gabriel valleys. Nestled right in between Glendale and Pasadena, Eagle Rock actually sits astride the eastern boundary of the San Fernando Valley and the western boundary of the San Gabriel Valley. So it's not technically its own city anymore. It was incorporated as a city in 1911, but the growing population resulted in the need for an adequate water supply, as well as a high school, and the city of Eagle Rock was annexed by the city of Los Angeles in 1923. So now Eagle Rock is a cool neighborhood in the northeast section of the city of Los Angeles. But back to early July 1985. One evening, a young officer with the LAPD got a call over his radio that a woman had just been assaulted on the street and that the perpetrator had tried to force her into his car. She had successfully fought him off, but he got away and fled under the 134 freeway. He was driving an old Toyota, and he was described as a skinny Latino male with long, wavy hair and stinking, rotten teeth. As this officer was en route to the location on the freeway, he noticed, not too far in front of him, an old Toyota driving erratically. As he approached the vehicle from behind, man, it sure looked like the driver had wavy black hair. Sirens, flashing lights alerted the driver to pull over, which he did by taking the next freeway exit, after which he slowed to a stop on a side street in Pasadena. He sat for a moment in the car, seemed busy doing something with his hands, then opened the door and sprinted off into the night. The officer, not expecting the suspect to flee, was too slow in his response and realized quickly that any attempt to catch up with the guy would be fruitless. He put out an APB and then went about having the car towed to an impound lot. When the deputy arrived at the car, he realized what the driver had been so busy doing in the moments before he ran. For whatever reason, the guy took a long moment to draw a pentagram on the dust of the windshield. The officer made sure to tell the impound lot to hold the car for prints. Welcome back to The Devil Within, Satan's Shadow. You're listening to Episode 7, Violence. In the first 6 episodes, we've covered attacks by Ramirez at 8 separate locations with at least 13 victims, and tangentially looked at a spate of abductions of little girls, the total number being unknown. It all began in March of 1984, and now, having arrived in July of 1985, that would make 8 attacks in 16 months. Extremely active for a serial killer. But then, something must have snapped in the already broken mind of Richard Ramirez, because over the next 5 weeks, he engaged in what investigators would describe as a, quote, spree within a spree that would result in at least 7 brutal attacks. It got so bad that police believed there had to be a copycat on the loose, maybe even 2. Even they found it hard to believe that the Valley intruder was capable of such extreme escalation. But that turned out to be wishful thinking. Just 2 days after the attack on Whitney Bennett, where Ramirez was sure of Jesus' intervention, he was back on the street, this time in a new, stolen Pontiac. The early morning hours of July 7th, 1985, found Ramirez cruising the familiar environs of Monterey Park, very close to where he had killed William Doy, Dale Okazaki, and Veronica Yu. He felt comfortable here. He knew his way around. Either by luck or the process of elimination, Ramirez found an unlocked gate that led to the backyard of a house owned by a 61-year-old grandmother named Joyce Nelson. Joyce had worked the production line at Coast Envelope Company since she was in her 20s and had plans to retire the following summer. She loved working, but she loved playing golf more, and that was her plan. Retire and spend the rest of her life either with her grandchildren or on the fairway. But sometime after 3 a.m. on July 7th, Richard Ramirez removed a screen from an open window, found Joyce asleep on the couch, and stomped her to death. The damage to her face caused by Ramirez's feet was so severe that she was unrecognizable. But what was recognizable was a sneaker print from a Nivea size 11.5 on what remained of the right side of Joyce's face. She was discovered the next morning when a neighbor checked on her because he saw a screen tossed into a flower bed on Joyce's property. Critically important here was that Joyce was not sexually assaulted, and tragically, Ramirez still needed to scratch that itch. Back in his stolen car, he drove out of Monterey Park and cruised a few other nearby neighborhoods before returning to Monterey Park sometime around 4:30 a.m. It wasn't long before he found the house of 63-year-old Sophie Dickman. Ramirez quietly broke in and found Sophie asleep in her bed. At gunpoint, Ramirez handcuffed her and proceeded to brutally rape her before demanding to know where she kept her valuables. After ransacking her entire house, she swore to Ramirez that there was nothing left for him to steal. When he heard her scream, "I swear there's nothing left," Ramirez approached her and placed his gun to her forehead and demanded, "Swear on Satan." And she did. Then for 2 weeks, the beast lay silent. Ramirez's haul from his evening of violence in Monterey Park proved sufficient to both his fence and his drug dealer to be enough to keep him going. But on the evening of July 20th, the beast stirred once more. Ramirez was desperate, and his actions would only serve to underscore that desperation. He would put some miles on his stolen Pontiac that night. He drove north on the 5 freeway out of downtown, past Dodger Stadium, but before he got to the LA Zoo, he transferred onto the 2 freeway north towards Glendale. The 2 freeway hits the 134, and Ramirez took that west, but only for one exit. Whatever broken synapses firing in his brain told him that Stanley Avenue, in a quiet section of Glendale just off the freeway, was the place to be that night. As mentioned in the last episode, and others, Ramirez was always changing up his methods, and he kept the police several steps behind, despite all the evidence that Ramirez left. In the last episode, he decided to use a tire iron to attack Whitney Bennett. Tonight, he brought along a different weapon. One he was sure to have trained on, because his cousin Mike definitely used one in the jungles of Vietnam. A machete. We're not sure where Ramirez got a machete, but he had it with him on the night of July 20th. Ramirez randomly chose the house of 68-year-old Maxon Needing and his 66-year-old wife, Leela. He snuck around the back of the house, cut the screen on the kitchen door, and stretched it out so he could reach the doorknob and let himself in. He found the couple sleeping in their bedroom. He burst in and, without warning, began hacking at their bodies while they slept. They awoke to this abject horror, only each to get shot twice in the head. Ramirez quickly ransacked the house for valuables and sped back to downtown Los Angeles to see his fence. But it still wasn't enough. In the northern San Fernando Valley lies the neighborhood of Sun Valley, a working-class community that's part of the city of Los Angeles. Sun Valley borders the Burbank Airport and the city of Glendale to the south and connects to downtown LA using the 5 freeway corridor. After fencing his goods, Ramirez climbed back into his Pontiac and headed north on the 5. He drove farther than he usually did, almost twice as far, until he wound up in Sun Valley. He picked a house, walked around back, and found the sliding glass door open. His luck in finding these homes with easy access, again, was largely due to the searing heat wave that had by now gripped the entire American Southwest. The home Ramirez chose that night belonged to the Kovananths, a family of Cambodian immigrants making their way towards the American dream. Chanarong Kovananth and his wife Somkid were 32 years old, and they had an 8-year-old son on that summer night in 1985. Somkid had fallen asleep on the couch, but woke up at 12:30 when her husband came home from work. She locked the front door, kissed her husband goodnight, and as he retired to the bedroom, she remained in the living room watching TV, where she, again, fell asleep on the couch. The sliding glass door that led to the backyard was left open, but the screen door was shut because, the airflow helped keep the house cool. Somkid was awoken for the second time that night by the screen door sliding open. A skinny man with what she described as a, quote, Mexican face and curly dark hair, entered the house and pointed a gun at her. This man told her to stay quiet or he would kill her. The intruder then walked right into the bedroom and shot Chanarong in the head, killing him instantly. The man then returned to the living room and bound and raped Somkin. At 6 a.m., the alarm clock in the boys' room went off, alarming the intruder, who then entered the room, struck the boy a few times before binding his hands and feet. The intruder then searched the house for valuables, demanded any cash that the family kept in the house, and demanded jewelry, which he placed in a pillowcase, and the VCR, which he concealed in a suitcase that he had found in the master closet. He also made off with a silver coin collection. Before leaving, he dragged Somkid into the master bedroom, bound her hands and feet, smacked her up a few times, and fled. During the entirety of the attack, the intruder repeatedly demanded that Somkid swear on Satan that she wasn't holding back anything of value. The Somkid jewelry would later be among the items that Ramirez's fence, Felipe Solano, would turn over to investigators. Then, on August 6, 1985, Ramirez nearly met his match. On this night, Richard Ramirez further expanded his hunting grounds, going all the way to Northridge, more than 30 miles northwest of downtown Los Angeles. He found himself gaining easy access to the Peterson house, where 30-year-old Chris Peterson lived with his 27-year-old wife, Virginia, and their infant daughter. Virginia remembers being awoken to the sounds of footsteps in the hallway outside her bedroom, and by the time she had fully woken up, a man was standing at the side of her bed, grinning. He was tall and skinny, with dark curly hair. Ramirez raised his gun to shoot the still sleeping Chris Peterson, but Virginia moved to shield her husband and took the bullet in the face. Ramirez, again fully aware that men are obstacles to his ultimate plan, fired again and struck Chris Peterson in the head just in front of his right ear. But Chris Peterson was different. What, you think a gunshot to the freaking head was going to stop this guy? Well, yeah, kinda. I mean, shouldn't it have? Nope, not this guy. He took a bullet to the brain and then charged his attacker. Ramirez must have been in shock, terrified, and desperate just to get the hell out of there. As he fled, he threw 2 more shots from his .25 caliber pistol over his shoulder in the general direction of basically, the Terminator who was chasing him down. Oh, and by the way, The Terminator, the James Cameron film that launched Arnold Schwarzenegger into superstardom, came out the previous summer and was still very much in the cultural zeitgeist. I like to think that Ramirez had thoughts of a robot from the future tracking him down and killing him. That would probably scare him more than Jesus smiting him for his sins. Both the Petersons would survive the attack and give a detailed description to police. Now, the media coverage was ramping up right alongside Ramirez's escalation. 7 separate attacks in just over a month, all committed under the cover of darkness, caused a beat reporter from the Los Angeles Herald-Examiner to dub Ramirez for the first time the Night Stalker.
Police are searching for a 6-foot-tall man with dark curly hair and badly stained teeth, dubbed the Night Stalker, who may have committed 13 murders and 12 grisly assaults in the San Gabriel and San Fernando Valley since February. The crimes are different, but the method is always the same. He enters private homes at night through an unlocked door or open window and hunts down his prey while they sleep.
Aside from the nature of entry, the approximate time of day that entry is made, beyond that, it's difficult to categorize them.
Victims range between the ages of 16 and 80, from women alone to couples with children. Some have been strangled, some shot. Most of the women have been raped. What baffles police is that the attacks are random.
It's like having our neighborhood raped itself. Someone violated our sanctuary.
I've left my windows open before, but not anymore.
Gun stores report they can't keep handguns in stock.
I want to be able to defend myself.
The investigative task force is hampered by a psychological profile that differs for most serial killers.
He doesn't make any substantial efforts to choose a victim and then do whatever it takes to enter. He seems to enter whenever entry is easy.
The investigation is the largest in Los Angeles County since the Hillside Strangler murdered 13 women in the late 70s. But the random nature of these attacks, with seemingly no motive, may make this case even more difficult to solve. Nadine Berger, CBS News, Los Angeles.
This episode is brought to you by the Nissan Armada Pro 4X. With a twin-turbo V6 engine ready to propel your adventures, up to 8,500 pounds of towing capacity to haul all your favorite toys and space for 8 passengers. Nissan's most powerful car yet will chew up and spit out anything you throw at it. Learn more about the all-new 2025 Nissan Armada at nissanusa.com. Towing capacity varies by configuration. See Nissan Towing Guide and Owner's Manual for additional information. Always secure cargo.
Here at the Almond Joy Factory, where tropical vibes abound, we use soft, fresh-tasting coconut.
The crunchiest almonds and delicious chocolate candy.
Ah, but do you know what our most important ingredient is? Sometimes you feel like a nut.
Sometimes you don't.
Almond Joy's got nuts and something even way better than that. Yes, Almond Joy is made with almonds and joy.
Good night, itchy eyes. Good night, sudden sneeze. Good night to your symptoms of allergies. Zysol is the allergy medicine you take before bed. It provides powerful relief while you rest your head. Not just all night, but all the next day. Zysol keeps working, keeping allergies at bay. And without those annoying symptoms disturbing your rest, you can wake up the next morning feeling your absolute best. Remember, be wise all. Take Zysol. At night.
This episode is brought to you by State Farm. You might say all kinds of stuff when things go wrong, but these are the words you really need to remember. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. They've got options to fit your unique insurance needs, meaning you can talk to your agent to choose the coverage you need, have coverage options to protect the things you value most, file a claim right on the State Farm mobile app, and even reach a real person when you need to talk to someone. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there.
The sun, now an absent god above the leaden skies of hell, had long since forsaken this land of perdition. A bitter wind curled through the charred trees, their blackened husks standing like mourners at a funeral of righteousness. Dante followed Virgil, stepping gingerly down the path toward the seventh circle, his soul trembling, yet alive with curiosity, for knowledge was his burden and his salvation. Virgil, ever the unflinching guide, cast his eye upon the broken landscape, a field of barren rock, punctuated by rivulets of boiling blood. Here was the domain of the violent. Those who had unleashed their wrath upon others, upon themselves, and against God, now reaped their due in a place sculpted by the enormity of their own crimes. Dante had known violence in his life. He had seen it in the clashes of the Guelphs and the Ghibellines, in the blood that had fed the soil of Florence. He had felt it in exile, in the cruelty of false friends. But this was the culmination of the fury that men had loosed upon the world. At the rim of the seventh circle, our poets were met by the Minotaur, its muscled bulk trembling with rage, its nostrils flaring as it sensed the scent of the living. Its hooves pawed at the scorched ground, eyes rolling in fury. Virgil, unimpressed by the beast's posturing, took a step forward and addressed the creature as though it were a mere inconvenience rather than a monstrous guardian. Step aside, ruin of Crete. Our journey is divinely ordained. The Minotaur bellowed, its voice echoing through the pit, but it was as if Virgil's words had chained it in place. It frothed at the mouth, half blind with anger, but its movements were sluggish, hampered by a fury so deep that it weakened rather than empowered. Dante saw in the creature the embodiment of violence, blind, senseless, unable to reason. The poets moved past, descending to the banks of the Phlegethon, the river of blood. Its steaming surface reflected the glow of eternal fire, and within its depths were those who had spilled the blood of others. Tyrants, warlords, murderers, and brigands. They waited in their judgment, submerged according to the measure of their sins. Here was Alexander the Great, the Macedonian whose conquests were written in slaughter. There was Attila, king of the Huns, his face twisted in eternal agony. At the shore, centaurs with bows drawn patrolled the riverbank, shooting arrows at any soul who dared rise above his allotted depth. One such centaur approached, Nessus, whose own tale of betrayal had doomed him to hell's service. "This is where all who lived by violence must abide," Nessus explained, his voice a low growl. "No tyrant may raise his head, no murderer may seek respite." Virgil nodded, leading Dante onto Nessus's broad back. The centaur carried them across the river, and Dante shuddered as he gazed down into the depths, where kings and soldiers writhed beneath the searing currents. Here was violence met with violence, an eternal retribution. Beyond the river, the land shifted, becoming a desolate wasteland where gnarled trees twisted like the limbs of the condemned. This was the wood of the suicides. Dante recoiled at the mournful whisper that passed through the air, not wind, but voices, sighing through the branches, issuing forth from the very bark of the trees. These were the souls of those who, in life, had cast themselves into death's embrace. A branch broke near Dante's shoulder, and from the wound oozed not sap, but dark blood. The tree moaned in anguish, and a voice called out, a voice that had once belonged to Pierre della Vigna, the chancellor of Frederick II, now doomed to this arboreal torment. "In despair, I forsook my body," the tree lamented, "and now, denied even my form, I stand rooted in my sorrow, unable to return to what was lost." Dante's heart ached, for he understood too well the weight of despair, the shadow of exile that could drive a man to the brink. Virgil, perceiving this sadness, urged him forward. At the far edge of the woods, the poets came upon a field of burning sand, where flakes of fire fell from the sky in an eternal scorching rain. Here, the blasphemers and sodomites suffered their due. Upon the ground, stretched in defiance, lay a giant of a man, his face still bearing the stubborn resolve of one who would not bow even before divine punishment. "I am Capaneus," the figure roared, his voice mingling with the flames. "I blasphemed God in life, and now he punishes me, but I will never submit." Virgil regarded him with an air of pity rather than scorn. "Even here you cling to your pride. It's not the fire that torments you most, but your own unyielding defiance." Dante took in the sight, and he understood. The true agony of the damned was not merely the punishment they suffered, but the permanence of their condition. There would be no change, ever, no redemption, ever. As they pressed on, another figure emerged from the haze, striding with urgency through the flames, and Dante recognized him immediately. Brunetto Latini, his former mentor. The sight filled Dante with sorrow, for in life he had admired the man. He had sought wisdom in his words. "My son," Brunetto greeted him with a sad smile, "I walk this road for the sins of my flesh, but I still cherish the path you walk. May you remember my lessons and make my name endure." Dante wanted to cry, but he knew there was no solace to offer. He couldn't change the fate of the souls he met, only witness and learn. As the poets left the burning sands behind, the seventh circle loomed complete in Dante's mind. A place where violence was met with violence, where suffering was as unrelenting as the sins that had begotten it. Virgil turned to his charge, his eyes solemn. There are yet deeper circles to tread. Are you prepared? Dante swallowed his fear and nodded, for the journey was far from over. Diamond Bar is a city in eastern Los Angeles County, about 30 miles east of downtown. On the sweltering night of August 8th, 1985, just 2 nights after Ramirez barely escaped the Peterson home with his life, he drove to this inland city of Diamond Bar. In the 48 hours since the Peterson attack and the name the Night Stalker had been introduced and flooded the TV and radio programs across California and the nation, by then everyone knew. Everyone was on edge. Everyone was scared. It was sometime after 2:30 a.m. on August 8th that 27-year-old Sakina Abawat was jolted awake by the sound of a gunshot. Before she could even get her bearing, she was violently struck on the side of the head, forced onto her stomach, and handcuffed to the bed. Her attacker was standing above her and began kicking her in the ribs, back, and stomach before binding her feet and stuffing a t-shirt into her mouth. He then forced her to swear on Satan that she wouldn't scream, because if she did, he would kill her children. 2 boys, one of them was 3 years old and the other was just 10 days old. Sakina was then forced onto the floor, and it was then she realized that the gunshot she heard was the shot that killed her husband, who had been asleep beside her, 31-year-old Elias Abawat. Sakina was then forced to relinquish all the valuables in the home, including jewelry that was hidden in the closet. Anything to get this maniac to leave. But her nightmare was just beginning. Ramirez dragged her into a guest room and raped her and beat her some more. Then, when her newborn began crying, Ramirez allowed her to comfort the baby and put him back to bed. Then he raped her again until the 3-year-old woke up and began crying. By this time, Ramirez was done, so he allowed the boy to crawl in bed next to his mother. Then he tied them all up, covered them with sheets and pillows, and left. Sakina was eventually able to free herself and call the police. The description she gave let investigators know that the Night Stalker was still expanding his territory. They just didn't know how far he was willing to go. Now, this whole time, Ramirez had been closely following the news reports about him. He knew things in Los Angeles were heating up, so he decided to head north to another one of his old stomping grounds, San Francisco. He wanted to get out of town, decompress, let the heat die down. But he was riding such an intoxicating wave of violence that he just couldn't stop. Peter and Barbara Pan, yes, the man's name was Peter Pan. The Pans lived on Eucalyptus Street in the Lake Merced section of San Francisco. On the evening of August 18th, 1985, their son stopped by to say hi, and instead found his father murdered by a gunshot wound to the head while he slept, and his mother beaten and sexually assaulted. The house was in shambles, and the family jewelry was missing. Barbara Pan, though terrified, beaten, and exhausted, was able to give a description of her attacker. Skinny, bad breath, Latino, dark curly hair. Plus, the forensics team found a near-perfect footprint in the soft dirt outside a bedroom window. As stated, everyone, especially law enforcement, knew about the Night Stalker, and the description was unmistakable. The authorities in Los Angeles were alerted as to the possibility that their serial killer might have struck almost 400 miles to the north. Detectives Salerno and Carrillo were skeptical, but looked at the evidence anyway and were shocked at what they saw. Description of the attacker aside, it was the shoe print that convinced them. An Avia men's aerobic shoe, size 11.5. They called back and let San Francisco authorities know that, indeed, the Night Stalker was in their midst, and they needed to join forces to finally stop this maniac once and for all. Yes, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department expected help, but that's not at all what they received. Next time on The Devil Within, Satan's Shadow. 18 months of detective work are flushed down the toilet. Or, I should say, tossed into the bay. And it seems the sheriff's department is back to square one. But then they catch a break. The break they've been waiting for. Plus, we dive into the 8th circle of Dante's hell. Fraud. That's next week on The Devil Within, Satan's Shadow. The Devil Within is an EVO production, recorded live at Bel Air Studios in Los Angeles, California. Written and produced by Brandon Morgan, executive produced by Danny Abelson. For The Devil Within, I'm your host, Brandon Morgan.